Professor Denninger, thank you for coming back to moderate. So as a recurring moderator now, I think 3 times, Professor Denninger is an Emmy Award-winning television production executive and innovative educator who has produced live sports television from 6 continents across the United States. He was the first coordinating producer of ESPN and has since went on to become a professor of practice at Syracuse University. I can speak to him myself. Amazing person, amazing professor. I'm really looking forward to this conversation, and I'll let you take it away from here.
Excellent. Thanks, Ben, and thank you, you and your group for setting up these webinars, which have been terrific. Welcome, Dave. Dave McMenamin began his career as an NBA writer, reporter for ESPN in 2009. He was a beat writer and television analyst, primarily covering the Lakers and the Cavs. Began his career covering the NBA in 2005 for NBA.com. Played some basketball collegiately for the University of Limerick in Ireland, which we're going to have to ask about. Graduated from Syracuse University, and he was a student manager for the 2003 National Championship team, and we'll also touch on that. He's a Philadelphia native, and right now we're talking to Dave in lovely Lake Buena Vista, Florida. Is that correct, Dave?
That's right, Dennis. We are inside the bubble. I'm in the yellow tier of the media access for the bubble. We'll be moving into green at some point, but I've been here close to 3.5 weeks, and so far so good. Knock on wood. Keep getting negative results on the COVID test. I just took one right before we started this webinar, and the league has done a really good job of making sure that everyone is getting negative tests since they set this thing up.
Now, when you say yellow level, where does that put you to cover the events and what surrounds it?
So I'm in a hotel that is about a 5, 6, 7 minute shuttle ride away from the Wide World of Sports complex. And once I get there, you get off the shuttle basically the same place the green folks do, go into a separate entrance to the arena, and then we're sitting up in the 200 level versus the 100 level, and our media access in terms of talking to players is all through Zoom. The benefit of being in yellow, of course, is we have our eyes and ears, and you pick up stuff that you wouldn't see in the broadcast. You get to, talk to some operation folks who are, involved in the yellow tier up in the Raptors. And then also, of course, there's a lot of executives. Teams are only allowed to have X amount of people inside the bubble. So I left my COVID test this morning, had a brief chat with the assistant GM for the Clippers, because they only have the GM inside the bubble, inside the green zone. And I've had several conversations like that where you're just getting a coffee in the lobby at this hotel, and it's an executive from the Kings or even the Lakers, or right on down the list. And those are the little conversations that add up, because ultimately you just want to be person to person with all the folks in the league, not reporter and subject. And getting a chance to recognize that literally we're living the same existence right now. It gives you common ground that you'll hopefully I can lean on in the future.
So you're inside the bubble means everybody else in your family and your circle of friends is outside the bubble, right? How's that working? You've been down inside there for 3.5 weeks. That means you've been apart from family and the rest of the folks for 3.5 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly recognize how fortunate I am to be involved with this, and I don't even want to know what my job would look like if the NBA wasn't able to pull this thing off. But it's a lonely existence. Like, it's basically I go to the gym. Today I'll go there around probably 2:00. Some way in the middle of the first game, and then I won't leave the arena till around 2 a.m. And then I come back to the hotel, maybe watch some TV and have a snack, fall asleep by 3, get up at 9 or 10 the next day and do it all over again. And there's little time for anything else. And I mean, fortunately for me, like, I'm a basketball freak, so it works out. But and I don't have children or anything like that. But yeah, I don't get to see my girlfriend. I haven't seen my family members who are all in Philadelphia since April, and it wears on you.
Now, when you take a step back from yellow level and all the rest of that, what's your overall impression of how this bubble is working at Disney World and the concept that the NBA had, and what is your takeaway from all of this?
Yeah, I mean, Dennis, I was consuming voraciously anything we could watch before I got down here. So I was watching all the scrimmage games. I was involved in all the Zoom calls, texting and calling with friends I knew inside the bubble at that point, because I got here about 3 weeks after it opened up. Until I saw it in person, though, I didn't recognize how impressive it is. And the NBA sent out this 113-page document that was kind of ridiculed to some degree because it just seemed so over the top. Like, it had every detail down to here's the proper formula for making sanitation fluids to wash basketballs in between training sessions. It seemed like, okay, we can get that thing figured out. But the massive undertaking, when you leave no stone unturned, you can actually keep things moving in the right direction. And so it's very logical. Once you get to the Worldwide of Sports complex, there are 3 arenas within, a 5-minute walk of one another. You are getting a temperature check. At least in my zone, you're getting a temperature check before you can get on the shuttle to go to the arenas. You get a wristband that shows that you got that temperature check. If you're not wearing the wristband and you're trying to get into arena, they give you a temperature check, which is like a air gun that they, kind of point towards the back of your forehead. Yeah, it's a strange thing, honestly. As I said that, it's the first time I described it, but it's like a plastic device that they aim and point towards the back of your head, right behind your ear. And then, once you get in there, they have replicated the NBA experience by having, crowd noise pumped in. And of course, you're the home team. You're the team that gets noise at appropriate moments. If your team's going on a run, it gets louder in the arena. And that's actually, I don't know whether it's randomness, it's such a small sample size, but home teams down here, the home designated team, are winning more than 60% of their games, which is better than they actually do in the regular season for the NBA, which is remarkable. And the guys are in their uniforms, the guys are getting into it, and I've covered several games down here. Particularly the Brooklyn Nets Blazers game at the end of the seeding round, and Lakers Clippers on opening night. Those games felt just like any other game I would have covered. Now, of course, it's not identical, but in terms of the product, in terms of the intensity, in terms of the level of focus I had on it, and you could clearly see the players had on it, they've created NBA basketball down here.
That's what I was going to ask. Once you get past all the air guns and all the rest of it, has it started to feel like the NBA playoffs?
Yeah, it has. I mean, we're breaking down series, and we're looking at. I mentioned I ran into a Clippers executive in the lobby. He was on pins and needles because his team's 1-1 and they just lost to the Dallas Mavericks. And they have a game tonight, and he's looking at that game just like he was looking at that game when we were playing in Staples Center or American Airlines Arena in Dallas. And that's the beauty of what they've done here is once they got the commitment, and it was a big commitment. Now I understand that NBA players would stand to lose $400 million. Had they not agreed to come down here. And so obviously there's a major motivation there, but a lot of these players, same thing we talked about, they're leaving their family, they're leaving their loved ones. Alex Caruso for the Lakers skipped his sister's wedding, and I have siblings. It would not sit well with me or my family to miss one of their weddings. It just wouldn't. It would be something that would be brought up for the rest of my life, and that's a major commitment. And but with that, I think they recognize, like, now we're down here, let's get down to business. And the basketball has been really good.
Now, what steps did you take at Syracuse and following graduation that led you to ESPN just 6 years later? It took me 9 years from graduation to get to ESPN as SportsCenter's first coordinating producer. But what steps did you take that got you from Syracuse to ESPN in that period of time?
Well, I think the first step was prior to Syracuse. I when I was in high school, wrote for the school paper, interned at NBC 10 in Philadelphia, and made some kind of connections there. Obviously, once to get to Syracuse, it was really about, one, embracing the competition of my classmates and recognizing that like this isn't just like a passing interest anymore. Like you got to go in, head first. And so whether that was writing for the Daily Orange, writing for the Student Voice, eventually having an internship with the Post Standard, I didn't do WAER. The name escapes me of the radio station I did some fill-in work with, but just anything I could do, quite frankly. And then I worked in the Career Development Center as my work-study job at Newhouse, and that was really cool because I got to see alumni reaching out and asking for contacts from our alumni database, and I became fluent with that. And so I recognized it's not that hard to send an email to someone and inquire about stuff. I got a break in my sophomore year. The LA Times had a sports writing symposium where they invited 30 students around the country to come out for that. And I submitted and was invited. And that was like just a moment in terms of like, I should just, if I see stuff, like go for it. Why not? And then really it came down to luck though. All that work that I did, I went to school at Syracuse, and one of my best friend's younger sisters was friends with the daughter of the old deputy commissioner of the NBA, Russ Granick. She went to Syracuse, and through that connection, I got a resume to her dad, and her dad, got my resume to the HR person at NBA.com. And I was able to get my foot in the door. And then from there, it was just about continuing to go full bore. And then I got lucky again when ESPN created the local sites in 2009. Like I had been covering the league for 4 or 5 years, a younger guy in LA, ready to go. And it kismet worked out. But I like to think that those doors wouldn't have opened had I hadn't been kind of just staying on that track otherwise.
Well, the major point there is you weren't hired by Russ Granick because his daughter's friend knew you. It was, okay, here's a resume. Oh, if there was nothing on the resume,
right.
There's just, that would have been a non-starter, right? So
right.
It's all the work that you do up to, and then everybody needs some breaks, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And, and I had stuff on my resume back then that I thought was quite impressive. As you move in the field and you see the people who have really made a name for themselves, you're like, oh yeah, I mean, those clips I had back as a 22-year-old weren't quite as impressive. But yeah, I mean, I was, certainly when I sat down or did a phone interview actually with NBA.com to start, I knew what I was talking about, and I wasn't trying to polish up limited experience. I had like 5 or 6 years of experience dating back to high school of covering games and writing stories and working on packages and logging video. And that's one thing that I think has benefited me. And it just happens to be kind of the timing of my career, is that there was never really a delineation for me between writing, TV, radio. I've been doing all of those things ever since I've been in the business. And that's allowed me, I think, to have confidence in all of those things. And it's also kept the job more interesting because as I've done more TV, it's like a new discipline to dive into. And then maybe you feel more comfortable with that. And then you're like, okay, the writing, let's dive into that and try to get better at that. I think that's, I think you got to keep getting better at this job to stay in this job. And I think having interest in the different realms of it helps that.
You point to what I refer to in classes as media convergence, in that if you're a writer, you're being asked to be part of podcasts, you're on the radio, you're being asked to analyze or do pieces, short pieces on TV, or not even on TV. I mean, in my last job at ESPN was running ESPN digital video as head of production for digital. And you're doing stand-ups that aren't going to be on television, but they're going to be seen by 800,000, right. 1 million people online. So it's all converged. There's nothing that isn't multimedia now. And somebody who embraces, that's a good lesson, is is embrace as much of the media as you possibly can, or as much of the sports industry as you can, correct? For sport management majors. That's part of the success that you're outlining as kind of the path to it.
Yes. I remember, and it's going to make me sound like a dinosaur, but I remember, I don't know, it might have been 5 or 6 years ago, where ESPN.com, we learned that we have more traffic off of people's phones than on laptops or desktops. And I was like, that seems wild. And now, of course, everyone's going to watch stuff and consume stuff on their phones. And with that phone, it's so easy to contact people. And getting back to the relationship thing, of course, but you got to keep putting yourself out there and recognize that it's not a, I think when you get out of school, at least I was always focused on, you take this class to get an A, and you get this GPA to get this job, and blah blah blah. You get this SAT score to be able to get in the new house, and well, linear's thrown out the window when you graduate, and because of that, conversations that you have with folks in the business aren't going to be linear. You could have a great dialogue at some event where you meet someone, and you can follow up with a handwritten thank you note, or an email or a text or whatever, or even develop a text rapport with someone. It doesn't mean that there's going to be a job right around the corner for you, but if you get into, it's like a practice. If you get into the habit of doing that, your reputation will grow around you without you even recognizing it. And if you are building a good reputation, people have conversations when they need to hire someone, and they don't necessarily even go by their own experience. They ask other people in the industry, who do you know that would work for this job? Well, if you are reaching out to all the people around you, whether it be sports management, whether it be trying to be a broadcaster, trying to be a beat writer, whatever realm of this industry you're trying to go into, your name will ring bells if you're doing stuff like that and doing things the right way.
Is there anybody that you would point to who has been valuable as a mentor or as an advocate, who is somebody saying, hey, this guy Dave is really good, you should take a look?
Absolutely. His name's Adam Stanko. He was a former CP at ESPN, actually. He's been at Pac-12 Network the last 7 years or so. When I was in high school, when I was interning at NBC 10, he was the host of the Philadelphia Inquirer high school sports show out there. And so he was a couple years out of college at that point. I was still in high school. Obviously, he could see that I was interested in this. He actually took me on my first visit up to Syracuse. His younger brother was a student at the time there. Adam went to Ithaca. But then, so I had this guy that I developed kind of a big brother, little brother relationship with. He is 7 years older than me or so. So he was just like kind of a generation ahead of me in the industry. And he worked for Comcast in Philly, and then he worked for ESPN in Bristol, and now he works for the Pac-12 in San Francisco. And the time he was at ESPN, like, I was getting on shows I didn't know how it happened. I was like, oh, maybe they're seeing that my .com articles are tracking well, or Kobe's a popular subject. Well, no, Adam was having conversations in Bristol on my behalf. It's like, you got to talk about Kobe today. Like, you don't need to have Mark Stein or Chris Broussard. Like, why not give Dave a shot? And the reps that ended up allowing me to accumulate was so invaluable. And having champions like that mean everything.
That's one of the most important things that you can do in college, by finding professors or staff members, people who have experience and can advocate on your behalf. And it takes a little courage, though, doesn't it? I mean, the student has got to inquire or send an email or cross that threshold and put themselves out there. And you have to summon up a little bit of inner strength, right?
Yes, you certainly do. And I've been fortunate to be in this industry for a while now, and I stay very connected to Syracuse as much as I can. I bleed orange is on my social media and stuff. So I am hit up by students on a somewhat regular basis, and some of them I develop a relationship with, and some you can just see not necessarily having the right plan of attack to reach out. And, we're all busy in this industry, but it's something I feel like anyone that I know has a soft spot in their heart to want to try to give back and try to help out, because, everyone needs that break. But again, if it's coming out with a direct question like, hey, can I be your intern or something along those lines, it's a non-starter. And so, I've Robert Bruin is a current student at Syracuse Newhouse that I've been in touch with on and off the last year or so, and he'll do a podcast and send me the link, and he might send me 3 articles to a link, and 3 links to 3 articles, and I'm busy. I might only read one, but he keeps the constant flow of it, and then maybe we get on the phone every couple months, and that to me is a more organic thing. Craig Hoffman was a student back in the day that did the same thing, and we developed a rapport that same way. But those are the rare examples. There's many students I probably had 1 or 2 interactions with where it didn't go anywhere, and I don't know their names. And some of that's on me, of course. Like I'm not always in the moment to be able to embrace the inquiries, but I think a lot of it's on the students and their approach.
So I got to ask, how did you wind up playing basketball in Limerick, Ireland?
Okay, so I was a high school basketball player, not very good, but I know how to play basketball. Came to Syracuse, tried to walk on the team. We only had 2 walk-ons in the program back then. Everything's changed. Mike Hopkins told me about 5 years ago, and it devastated me that with the new APR rules, where walk-ons GPA are applied to the team GPA, and also in the Syracuse basketball roster expanding partially because of that. He's like, oh, you definitely would have been a walk-on all 4 years. I'm like, killing me, because I could play a little bit, but we won the championship my sophomore year that I was a manager. So after I didn't make the team, trying to walk on, I was invited to be a manager if I wanted to do it. I did. I wanted to be around the program. So freshman year was a manager, sophomore year was a manager. We win the championship in my sophomore year. And actually, I was at Adam Stanko's wedding, the guy I was mentioning as one of my mentors. And I was sitting at a table, and it was the summer before my junior year. And a lot of my friends were going abroad, and anyone listening, if you're a Syracuse student, I fully recommend, and hopefully the world is safer when you have to make that decision, but fully recommend studying abroad. And my older sister had studied abroad, and just something I wanted to be a part of my experience, but I also felt obligated to my commitment to Syracuse basketball, being a manager, and also ostensibly I was going to try out again. You try out till you can't try out anymore. And someone I sat with at the table at Adam Stanko's wedding told me, like, it's never going to get any better than what you just went through at Syracuse. Like, you won the championship. That's a great basketball experience. You want to play basketball, so go live that experience. And so, there was 2 kind of places that my friends and I were talking about going to, either University of Limerick or the Barcelona program that Syracuse had, because I minored in Spanish. And I think 5 of us from Syracuse, we all decided to go to Limerick, and I got in touch with the basketball coach there, and we had tryouts. 2 Americans were allowed to make the team. Like, that was the rules of the league. And me and my buddy Chris Dugan, another Syracuse guy, we were the 2 Americans to make it. And it was wonderful. I got to travel the country for free. We go on bus rides to play in Cork and play in Dublin and play all over the place. And I got to be a college basketball player. And so it was the time of my life. And credit to the Syracuse program, they understood what my decision was about, and they had a spot waiting for me back being a manager when I came back as a senior.
Being a manager on the SU team, did that help you in networking? One of the things that we've seen is a number of our students sign on to be managers, and it takes up so much of their summer that they don't wind up being able to do some of those summer internships and jobs that help beef up other students' resumes. What was that experience like? And how did it help?
It did help, and I understand it's a major time commitment. It really is, and it's like a full-time job. I just tried to do both, and it's not necessarily sustainable, but that was like my attitude that I'll still have writing internships and do this. But it definitely helped. I mean, I got to know, or I got to see firsthand, like Mike Waters do his job, and I talked to Mike this week for a story he wrote on Carmelo. He's the Syracuse basketball beat writer for the Post Standard. Todd Forcier was the strength coach of that Syracuse team. Todd Forcier is now the strength coach of the Portland Trailblazers. Troy Weaver was an assistant coach on that team. Troy Weaver is now the GM of the Detroit Pistons. Hakeem Warwick played 9 years in the NBA. I'm covering Carmelo in the playoffs right now. Those connections. Dion Waiters, because I've stayed connected to the program, Dion Waiters is on the Lakers right now, and the media member that he smiled at the most when he became a Laker was me, because we had a relationship going back years. So those connections, again, as I mentioned before, like my goal in covering the league is like it's person to person. It's not reporter player, not reporter front office member. We're in this, and you see me as a man, and having those experiences with Syracuse basketball allowed me to have, and sometimes it's kind of all it's not all you need, but if you have one really good source, because the league talks a lot, you can use them to either get new information or confirm information. And as you're young and starting out, a couple trusted sources can go a long way.
I've got a question here from Noah. What was different about that 2003 team that led them to the championship?
I mean, the simple answer is Carmelo Anthony. He was, a man amongst boys, and really at a time when college basketball certainly was still more position oriented. You still saw teams starting two guards and a center and a power forward and a small forward. Carmelo was this already like a stretch four when that wasn't part of what you're accustomed to seeing. So that was the biggest thing. But the leadership of Kawhi Deweyne was unreal. The talent of guys like Billy Edelin and Josh Pace off the bench, Jerry McNamara being so hot in that first half against Kansas. To me, like to bring it back to the idea of like you want to do the right thing and then you'll get a break. Coach Boeheim, he was due. He was doing the right thing for years and years and years, and building a team with a chance to win, but didn't get the right breaks. And that year, he got the right breaks. The Big 12 wasn't accustomed to seeing a 2-3 zone, and we played the entire Big 12 on the way to the championship. And it was. It's still. I mean, that's a pinch me thing to think about. Like, had I been born a couple years earlier, a couple years later, I've done the same thing, gone to Syracuse and all that stuff, wouldn't have the experience of a championship.
Now, in your career or in your professional, collegiate years, is there any failure or mistake that you made that you've learned from that's helped you move forward, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot, I guess. I mean, nothing like major, I'm fortunate to say, but I mean, there's been everything from, when I was younger, certainly when I was first starting at NBA.com, being a little too mouthy in emails, I'll put it that way. I just thought I was a know-it-all. I thought I knew. No, you always have to defer to the people around you that have the experience and that have the, quite frankly, have the position above you. And part of that is the respect factor, but also as part of it is the political factor. And, ESPN is a very, not political Democrat, Republican, very political company in terms of all the inner workings and the allegiances and the levers that you can pull, because there's different sects of people that rep for one another. And I didn't even comprehend that. Like, it was just like, well, no, I'm in my lane, and what I'm doing right now is important, and this team's I'm covering is important. So like, you know, but no, everything is connected, and I'm still learning that, but I've, you know, recognized that when you're going to say something, you know, it's a, you know, measure twice, cut once type of idea, and certainly communicate on everything. You know, again, the job requires a lot of work, and it requires you to be very like self-sufficient and to make decisions on your own, and you're still going to do that, but it's better to have a phone call or you know, send an email if you have questions about something, rather than, you know, make a decision unilaterally sometimes, because you know, that could be frowned upon, even if it was the best intended idea. You know, this is terms of like coverage, right? So say you're covering a game or a practice, and you know, we have to make editorial decisions every minute of this job, what we're going to tweet, what we're going to pitch, what we're going to write. But, you know, there could be a couple storylines coming out of a practice. Don't always think that you have the best idea. Loop in someone and say, there's this, this, and this, because there's been a couple times where I wrote about this, finding it very interesting, but someone else in the press corps that day wrote about something else that came up. I didn't find it interesting, but it did create, like, for instance, I have a specific example. This is 2012 or something like that. Been years and years and years since, maybe 2010. Years and years and years since Kobe Bryant had been in the dunk contest in '96, and we were in OKC for a shoot around. And someone asked him, "Hey, Kobe, you think you'll ever do the dunk contest again?" To me, it's a ridiculous premise. It's been 14 years since he'd done it, but he answered it, and I think he also gave some answers, follow-up answers on who the best dunkers were in the league at that point. To me, it was throwaway. I was more concerned with what the Lakers lineup was going to look like that night. Well, whomever wrote it or used it on the local television station in OKC, it got picked up by the blogosphere, and it was doing all this crazy traffic. And my editors were like, "Dave, weren't you there?" And I was like, "Yeah, I was there, but he was talking about the dunk contest." And they're like, you know, so now I try to like gather all the stuff I have now before I make my decisions, and loop in our news desk, be like, "I have this, this, and this. What would you like?"
You know, whenever I think of mistakes, and then I was at ESPN for 25 years, so there's piles of mistakes, you know, hidden in the tape library or wherever. But whenever I think about making a mistake, it usually went back to just not asking enough questions.
Yeah.
You know, if you don't ask that extra question, like, okay, what is it that we need to do to get the audio? You know, okay, we've got the link, but what is it that needs to be done?
Right.
I don't think I think there's a reticence for a lot of students or young people, the fear that if you ask a question, it's going to make it look like you don't know anything. Where it really is, this kid's really thinking, and he or she needs to know this. And thank goodness they're asking questions. So
Yeah.
a lot of it, when you talk about communications, that went off in my head, is if you're not asking questions of people, then you're not going to get the right answers. And then suddenly, it's either the wrong story, it's the wrong audio, or whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah, that's spot on. Yeah, and that's, you know, and some of it is, you know, you have to be willing to, just like you're going to build a source relationship, build relationships with your colleagues where you have the trust and they have your trust, where you can have these frank conversations without worrying about, you know, judgment, right?
You know, I've got a question here from Isaiah about the relationships. You need good relationships, obviously, but how do you balance that with your journalistic duties to report stories that might upset someone or criticize somebody that you've got a relationship with? What is your decision-making process when that is the case?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the best beat writers, and I you know, consider myself a pretty good one. You know, it's like an iceberg. You know, what is reported is the tip, and what you know is everything underneath. And you, especially in a position, if you are a reporter around a team or around the subjects you cover on a daily basis, you have to really have a cost benefit analysis conversation with yourself. Is this something that needs to come out this moment? And if it does, if it's clearly breaking news, like, you shouldn't be sitting on it, right? But if it's an anecdote or a detail that, perhaps would paint someone in a negative light, but isn't necessarily newsworthy, but it would work in a feature, you have to just think about opportunities there. And I mean, there are some people that are in this field who do horse trading, where they have a detail and they're like, well, I'm not going to write this, but you got to give me something else. I don't like that. That kind of makes me feel icky. But I see that that's done. I think it's having the information for when the moment requires it. So, for instance, if there is a trade or if there is a firing or a hiring, those are like the hot moments on the team that you cover, and you want to present as much information you have to come off as a voice of authority. If it's the day-to-day dealings of your team, the story's pretty much there. You're writing off what you see in the locker room, who you talk to, and what happened in the game. And I wouldn't necessarily use the bigger stuff that you're worried about, upsetting a relationship in those moments. Save it for the moments when you really need to shine, because you're being looked at by the sports world to be an authority on that moment.
Can you just go over the line between critical analysis? You're analyzing what someone did or failed to do as part of their profession, as part of what, versus being critical of an individual and making it sound personal, like, well, of course he didn't do this because he's always been lazy.
Yeah,
that kind of thing. What's the difference, and how does doing the former, leaving your criticism to analyzing what happens, how does that help your relationship down the road?
Yeah, that's a great point, Dennis. When I was getting into this, it was kind of like the start of the blogging wave, and I think you saw a lot of just opinions being put out there about body language that players would have, and that, going back to the 2003 national championship with Syracuse, Jeremy McNeil, after they won, is up on the podium as our backup center, and he looks sullen, and people thought, oh man, this guy wasn't getting playing time, and he's caring about that when they just won the championship. His mother died before the season started, and you get to understand context, and you're writing about body language, writing about a player's appearance. There's really no place for it in a judgmental way. If you want to write it descriptively and find out the story behind it, sure. But that's a bad pitfall that too many people fall into. If you limit your analysis to, because for instance, LeBron, I know him after covering him 7 years now, where the things that get under his skin to no end is when he has careless turnovers and misses free throws. He's like, I should be better than that. And so I have tried to delicately ask him about some of those things, especially when they've lost games because of it. And he's even stopped me being like, no, you can say it, I sucked. Most players will recognize what is a analysis of what they have failed at on the court, and recognizing the reasons for it, versus trying to come up with some grand narrative that isn't fact-based or analysis-based.
It's a good way to get relieved of your duties just by not being critical, and not necessarily criticizing somebody individually, but being able to analyze. I mean, you could go through the list of NFL greats who sat on at that desk in Bristol who aren't there anymore because they couldn't make critical analysis. And you go way back, some announcers at ABC who were doing college football could not bring it upon them. They could not bring themselves to criticize college kids out there playing football. Right. Well, you're not criticizing them. You're criticizing what he did, in that one play, and everybody makes mistakes. And so you have to maintain the relationships, but your job is to observe and to comment upon what you observe, right?
Yes, absolutely. And again, there's a stark difference between critical analysis and criticism.
Now, back to the bubble, because this is fascinating. Watching on television, this NBA product looks so much better than some of the other sports that don't have spectators. Now, I have been watching a good amount of the NHL, the Stanley Cup playoffs, and they've done a great job with these projection screens they seem to be 40 feet high, and they're masking the upper tiers, et cetera. That's pretty cool. But the NBA product looks fabulous compared to some of these baseball parks where they haven't even made an effort to make it look like anything other than empty seats. Is there a sense of pride in the NBA among some of these? It's like, we're doing something here that is innovative. And what's the reaction? What's the feeling there about the product that they're creating that people are being entertained by?
Absolutely, there's pride. The video monitors that surround the court are about 20 feet tall, completely interactive, always changing, vibrant colors, great sound. They partner with IBM to make that happen. There's a camera that is on a track that runs along the 94 feet of the court where you can get like kind of a courtside view of what's happening. And I was actually speaking to someone, it's a company out of Portland that's responsible for that technology. And they said, this has been used for like movie scenes where, maybe one scene, not going up and back down a court, running like a referee would. And actually the machine started to break down. They had to change like a ribbon inside of it because it wasn't used to that type of strenuous activity. But the cool thing is that okay, cool, we'll fix it. We'll get it. This hasn't been done before. So that level of innovation, I think there is a great degree of pride because just like, players have never left their families for months before and the leagues never had to operate in a bubble. The folks on the technology side are also bringing a lot to the equation. I mean, the ESPN compound down here is, the size of, a football field basically. And they're keeping everything running, and that we have internet and we have satellite feeds and we have everything as we would that didn't exist 7 weeks ago before this thing started.
So what kind of lasting effects do you think that there might be on the NBA post bubble, post pandemic? Some innovations in technology that they'll hold on to, or what other things do you see? Because there's a sense that nothing is going to be exactly the same as it was pre-pandemic. How do you see the NBA adapting and changing as we return to normal?
Well, one, in the immediate future, I think I know that there are some serious conversations among the league decision makers that this could be what happens next year as well. A multi-bubble regional format of this where you have X amount of weeks on, couple weeks off to be back to your family, X amount of weeks on, because they think this is a formula that will work. Larger picture, I think the NBA, having worked for NBA.com and seeing some of the technology that they embraced back in the day, now we take for granted reading a article online and there being an embedded video link. The NBA's website was, as far as I know, the first sports website to do that. That was innovative back then. And so you embrace some of these things and it becomes part of the experience. If teams are looking for sponsorship dollars after trying to get money back that they lost during the pandemic, well, there's the virtual fan sections are sponsored right now, and maybe that's something that will continue in the 28 NBA arenas as we move forward, because there's been fan interaction and there's money behind it. And so those are just small examples, but I think Adam Silver is the type of commissioner that will hear all ideas and figure out the best way to move forward. We haven't even gotten into it. It's probably a bigger conversation, and I just want to warn you, I have about 5 minutes because I got to go do Sports Center. the social justice aspect of it, I'm curious to see where that goes as well.
I've got two last questions here.
Yep.
The last one's going to be about what your recommendations are for students to do. So I want to put some time into that. But just Treetops, what do you expect the sports industry to look like post-pandemic? It resemble 95% of what it looked like before. What are you looking at as how does the sports industry change from what we're going through now?
Well, if we lose the college football season, I fear for a lot of layoffs coming up. And I hope that's not the case, but it's such a money generator for so many networks. That's one thing I fear for. But I think we will see. Another thing I fear for are teams recognizing that hey, we've done Zoom availability and we haven't had people in our locker rooms, and we only have to make one or two players available, and we don't have to grant one-on-one requests. That's also a fear I have, that the access that we had, which had dwindled dramatically in the time I've covered the sport, would get even worse. On the positive side, I think maybe we will not have as much travel, and quite honestly, the travel in this job is it's a major wear on any individual's life, their family's life, and maybe we get less of that, and I think that could be a good thing. And and maybe just an overall shrinkage of back sports to what they're supposed to be. I don't know. I mean, I think things got a little bloated, and that's salaries, and that's egos, and that's a lot of things, and maybe we get back to being in it for the right reasons.
So what steps should students be taking now, do you think? What would you recommend for them to do to prepare for careers in this post-pandemic sports industry?
Not in a way to say like you should know your worth, but also you should be saying yes to anything, and recognize that the non-linear path is going to be the way to go. And what you want to do is, if you get your foot in the door and it's not the perfect job, like when I started with NBA.com, I loved the NBA, but I was a night desk editor making hourly wage, no benefits, working 6 p.m. to 3 a.m. and working every weekend. It wasn't what I wanted, but it was tangential to what I wanted. And you had to treat the job that you don't necessarily love just as serious as the one you want to get, because you're always being watched, and you can always get better, quite frankly. So that's one thing. If you get a job, I mean, just getting a job in this economy, like, that's an accomplishment in itself. So feel good about yourself once you do that, and then make the most of it. And in the meantime, like, be as well-read as possible on so many levels, though. Like, make sure, if you're not a reader, be a podcast person. Listen to New York Times Daily podcast. Listen to Richard Deitch's sports media podcast. Jimmy Traina's sports media podcast. Know your industry and know your world, because ultimately, the way you're going to get information out of people is have conversations with people. If you don't know what you're talking about, you're pretty boring, and those conversations are going to go anywhere. And a lot of times you aren't going to just be talking about the sport that you cover with the athletes or the front office members or the coaches that you cover. You're going to be talking about everything surrounding the sport. And if you don't know what's going on, you can't really contribute much to the conversation.
And cultivate those mentors and advocates.
Absolutely.
Right? Because those are the people who will be able to help you chart your future course.
Yes, sir.
Dave, it's been a great pleasure. Thanks so much. Thanks for taking some time out of your fabulous existence down there in Lake Buena Vista, Florida. And Ben's going to say goodbye for us here. It's been great seeing you again.
Thanks, Tim. It's great to see you.
Thank you both very much for joining us today, as well as to our audience. Our student team worked hard to set this up. Thank you to Isaiah. I hope everyone has a great weekend. You can follow Dave on Instagram at Dave McTen, and Dave on Twitter at McTen. Dave, best of luck in the bubble.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Ben.
All right. Take care.
All right. Take care, guys.